So the fourth Sunday of Easter already, I remember in Lent getting up to the sixth and thinking, wow, these 40 days have stretched out into 42 or even more. How is this possible? Well, you don't count Sundays in Lent. And it seems like Easter's stretching on a little bit as well. That's all right. We get interesting readings during the Easter season. We get the Acts of the Apostles, which you don't get at another time. And we get these letters to John, and then we get the Gospel of John as well, which you also tend not to get during ordinary time. So it's a special time of different readings. But unfortunately, as usual, you need a little bit of background information in order to really understand the message Jesus is giving. So let me give you some background information about sheep. All right, because we don't know about sheep. Actually, it's kind of interesting. They were a mainstay of agriculture back in the Holy Land 2,000 years ago. But we don't do sheep here. We do cattle and we do pork and some other things. But sheep were big business. Sheep provided not just wool and meat, but milk and leather and lanolin, kind of a lubricant. I mean, it was really an important livestock creature and one of the few ones that the ancient Israelites used. They were somewhat hardy. They took well to very cold and very hot temperatures equally. Wool actually does that both. It actually keeps you from getting too cold. It actually radiates heat better than just not having it. They didn't tend to last all that long, but that's okay. You get new lambs every spring. No, it was important. Now, equally as important is how well you took care of them. Because as we heard in the gospel, there are wolves and there are other predatory creatures. So you need humans to look out after the sheep. At night, the sheep were brought back in from the fields and kept in the sheepfold. And the sheepfold is think of a walled pen, all right? And it's made out of rock because rock is free and you got a lot of it out there in the Holy Land. It's a hilly, rocky country. Kind of think of Scotland or something like that. And what they would do is pick up the rocks as they would come up to the surface, and the best rocks were laid out first, because you can't lay out a bunch of small rocks and then put a big rock on top of them and expect it not to fall over. So the best rocks were laid as a foundation, because these were laid dry. There's no mortar, and you just had to build your wall up. And the best of the best were put in the corners. You start with the four corners, and then build the foundation, and then build up the wall. And you have this nice sheepfold, this sheep pen made out of rock, and that's it. There's one entrance and one only, and that's because you only want to have to guard one. It's somewhat narrow, so one animal gets through at a time. Straight and narrow gate, perhaps. And now you got your sheep pen, and the whole village would keep all its sheep together. Well, how do you tell Farmer Smith's sheep from Farmer Jones? Okay, sheep perhaps are not that intelligent, but they're not all that dumb either. They know to stick with the flock, and they know which shepherd is theirs, because that's what they were born into as a little foal, as a lamb, and they've grown up as a sheep in that. And they actually would follow the correct shepherd, and especially the correct shepherd's voice. They would recognize that, and he would call out to them, and they would all gather and go out to pasture with him and him alone. And another group would go out to another pasture, and a third would go out to a third, and so forth. Then at night, they'd all come in. All right, so I had to tell you all that about sheep so that I could tell you this story about a sheep in the Holy Land, or as I guess we should say, a very young lamb, and his name was Seamus. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why would a sheep or a lamb in the Holy Land have an Irish name? Well, I don't know. But this story was first told to me by one of my seminary professors Dr. Thomas Groom, I actually should say the eminent Thomas Groom, because he's nationally known in religious education. And Tom is an Irishman, and the sheep's name is Seamus, and that's just the way it is. All right. So Seamus, of course, our sheep, our lamb really, was a very young lamb. He'd grown up in the Holy Land, and he lived with his mother and his family and a bunch of other sheep that belonged to his flock. And the shepherd would take them out in the morning, and they would pasture. In the afternoon, they would come back, and everybody was safe. There weren't all that many rules you had to follow to be a good sheep. Really, rule number one was do what the other sheep are doing, and you're going to be okay. And I suppose rule number two was don't do what the other sheep aren't doing, and you're going to be even better. But as I said, Seamus was, well, he was a lamb, and he kind of hadn't really absorbed the rules like he should have. And one day, right after all the sheep had come back into the sheepfold, and Seamus is walking around, and he notices near the cornerstone, as a matter of fact, of one corner of the sheep pen, well, where the big rocks are, because that's where you put the big rocks, there was kind of a slot between two of the larger rocks where they hadn't really come together when they were laid, because big rocks, you kind of can't get them perfectly together. And there was kind of a slot there, and it was much too small for a wolf to get through, but a young sheep or a lamb like Seamus, and he noticed that, well, he could kind of stick his head through and see out, kind of with one leg out, actually. And then it was a little bit of a squeeze, and I'm trying to imitate Seamus here, but he could get both out and then all of a sudden, he was outside of the sheepfold. And it was actually kind of nice because he wasn't with all those other sheep. He was by himself. And the grass is still green, and it's sunny. It's a little bit chilly because, well, actually, it really wasn't afternoon. It was kind of evening, and if you looked at the sun, it was kind of set. Well, actually, it kind of already had set. It wasn't dark, but it was kind of dark. And the other thing is, if you notice, when you're away from all the other sheep, it's actually kind of chilly at night. And just then a wolf howled way off in the hills, and it was answered by another wolf way over there. And Seamus suddenly realized that he was very, very afraid. And he turned around and tried to get back in through this slot, but the slot was kind of slanted, if you can picture this, and it was sharp, and there was no way he was going to fit back in through that slot. And just then, Seamus felt a nice, warm, strong but gentle pair of hands pick him up. And he noticed that it was, I should go like this, he noticed that it was the shepherd. And then Seamus was afraid again for a very different reason. And he figured, well, I better explain myself. So he said, "Shepherd, shepherd, thank goodness you are here." I mean, there was this hole, or kind of a slot, really, and I was afraid that, well, I don't know, maybe wolves could get in. It wasn't that small. And when I was outside, I noticed that it was kind of dark because the wolves were there. And we have to understand, Seamus was rather young, and he kind of mushed up the story a little bit. Now, the interesting thing was, the shepherd was carrying him back all this time to the straight and narrow gate. The shepherd didn't say anything. He listened, okay? Every once in a while he would nod in understanding and even smile a little bit. Seamus couldn't figure out whether he was smiling at Seamus or smiling to himself. But he didn't say anything, but brought Seamus in through the straight and narrow gate and gently set him down and kind of patted him. And Seamus, I suppose to his credit, ran right back and stood next to his mother sheep, kind of like nothing had happened here, just being a good old sheep. his mother knew better and told him exactly what she thought of a sheep that would go outside the fold and have to be picked up by the shepherd and brought back all by himself. But that is a different story. And then one more funny thing happened. A couple days later, I suppose I should say when Seamus was again allowed to go more than about a foot away from his mother's side, Seamus was there in the pen again after the afternoon roundup and all the sheep were back together. And he was near that same corner of the sheepfold. And he looked, and he saw that hole, that slot between the two stones was still there.
Thank you for joining us today. Our digital ministry provides a valuable service to parishioners and visitors alike. How wonderful that we can share God's Word, the celebration of the Eucharist, and other important words and events with those who may not be able to be with us in person. If you would like to support this effort, please go to olphglenview.org, click on the gold Donate button, and then the Sunday Giving icon to make a contribution on our secure online giving portal. We sincerely appreciate your past and ongoing support. Thank you for helping us continue this ministry. God bless.